Hi there, and welcome to the Daily Gardener, and thank you for listening. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling. It's December 10th. Today, we celebrate the gardener poet, known for writing Hope is the Thing with Feathers, and the man who became the world authority on agaves. We'll learn about the Victorian botanist who was the first to speak in favor of Darwin's theory, and the man who created the Ballard Lock Garden in Seattle. We'll hear a December poem from a man known during the 20th century as the People's Poet. And we grow that garden library with a book of letters between two gardeners during the year between 1998 and 1999. I'll talk about an architectural element for your kitchen that makes a tremendous holiday gift. And we wrap things up with a clever poem about King Midas and what would happen if his roses had turned to gold. But first, let's catch up on a few recent events. Here's today's curated articles, and we start things out with a book review about the book called Wild About Weeds, Garden Design with Rebel Plants by Jack Wallington. The review was written by Allison Levy, who was the winner of the Blog of the Year at the 2019 Garden Media Guild Awards. Jack's book is also one of my favorites for 2019. I especially enjoy the designer profiles that he features in his book, as well as Jack's ability to defend the plants that many of us secretly love, but might not admit in certain circles. His book, again, is called Wild About Weeds. And there was another post that was featured in Scientific American that discussed another book for gardeners. This one is called Botany at the Bar. This book was written by 3 scientists, and they do a deep dive into the world of bitters. In the article in Scientific American, they discuss the history of bitters, and they shared a recipe for a great holiday cocktail. The book, again, is called Botany at the Bar. It offers 75 botanically inspired craft cocktails. And by the way, folks on social media provided many ringing endorsements of this book, and the authors, saying that they had tried a number of their bitters at conferences and were definite fans. And then finally, NPR shared a post that was written by Esther N. Gumby called Who Doesn't Like Sweet Potatoes? This Kenyan Researcher for One, which begs the question, can you have too much of a good thing? The answer is yes, you can. Esther's post is very relatable. She grew up eating sweet potatoes for nearly every meal. And when I wrote about this post on social media, I said part of our desire for certain foods is their seasonality. Monotony is the death of pleasure. With regard to sweet potatoes, Esther wrote that many of her family members are just done with root vegetables. And she wrote, I will not eat sweet potatoes on Thanksgiving or any other time of year, and it all has to do with my Kenyan childhood. And she wrote, they remind me of what it's like to grow up without being able to choose what kind of food you'd like to eat each day. If you'd like to read Esther's fabulous article, just search for the word sweet in the Facebook group for the show, and Esther's post will pop right up. Now, if you'd like to check out these curated articles for yourself, you're in luck because I share all of them with the listener community on Facebook. So there's no need to take notes or search for links. The next time you're on Facebook, just search for the free Facebook group by typing in the Daily Gardener Community in the search bar, and then you'll see the group come up and you can request to join, and I'll admit you, I'd love to meet you in the group. Here's today's brevities. Today is the birthday of Emily Dickinson, who was born on this day in 1830. The Dickinson author Judith Farr reminds us that during her lifetime, Emily Dickinson was known more widely as a gardener than a poet. Emily grew up gardening. She would help her mother with their large edible and ornamental garden, and the flower garden became Emily's responsibility when she got older. She planted in a carefree cottage garden style, and after Emily died, her sister Lavinia took over the garden. Emily's niece and editor, Martha Dickinson Bianchi, recalls, all Lavinia's flowers did as they liked, tyrannized over her, hopped out of their own beds and into each other's beds, were never reproved or removed as long as they bloomed. For a live flower to Aunt Lavinia was more than any dead horticultural principle. And today is the birthday of Howard Scott Gentry, who was born on this day in 1903. A 1982 newspaper article shared a great story about Howard, saying, "This elder statesman of the botanical world is a first-class charmer when you get to his subject, his love for the wilds of Sonora and Chihuahua, Mexico, and about the years he spent as an agricultural explorer for the USDA, and about how he gradually came to know more about agaves than any other human being." Concerning the hectic pace of his agave research after his retirement in 1971, Howard said, "I don't like to start things and not finish them." Several times a year, Howard would plunge into the rugged interior of Mexico, perched atop a mule, just as he'd done during his first collecting trips nearly half a century earlier. Howard graduated college with a degree in vertebrate biology from the University of California at Berkeley, and he concocted the notion of becoming a freelance biologist. He came up with this scheme to pay for his first trip to Mexico. He sent 300 letters around the country to scientific institutions, naturalists, really anyone he could think of, soliciting collection orders. He wrote, "I came up with $3,000 worth of orders for anything and everything, for an embryo of a white-tailed deer, which I did collect, for birds' eggs, for ticks, for plant specimens." After this trip, Howard wrote Rio Mayo Plants. He recalled, "After that book came out, I became somewhat known as a botanist, which I wasn't. I was a zoologist, doing exceptionally well, writing as a botanist." Howard did complete a doctorate in botany at the University of Michigan, and in 1950 he became an agricultural explorer for the USDA. Based in Maryland, he traveled the world collecting plants. Howard became involved in a spurt of post-war agave work when it was discovered that the plants in the agave family and plants in the wild yam family contained compounds that seemed effective in treating arthritis. Because of his far-flung collecting, he had traveled in 24 countries, he was constantly introducing new plants to the United States. It was high-profile work in the botanical community. He wrote, "I refused several times to become a desk man for the USDA. It was a chance to cut out all the travel, but I told them, nope, not me. I want to work with plants, not people. People are problems." Today is the anniversary of the death of the Victorian British botanist, explorer, president of the Royal Society, and director of the Royal Botanic Gardens, Kew, Sir Joseph Dalton Hooker, who died on this day in 1911 at the age of 94. Hooker accomplished much during his long life. The Botanic Gardens of the world were a discovery and classification network he masterfully orchestrated into R&D facilities to enhance the world's economy and promote trade. Hooker was Charles Darwin's closest friend and collaborator. In fact, they corresponded about Darwin's theory long before it was made public. And Hooker was instrumental in getting Darwin's work published. And in 1877, Hooker was knighted for scientific services to the British Empire. And finally, here's an adorable factoid about Hooker. Kew Gardens recently shared that during his travels, Hooker would address letters to his young son, "To my dear little lion," or "my dear cub." That's sweet. And it was on this day in 1974 in Seattle, Washington, that 7 acres of gardens were named in honor of the eminent horticulturist Carl English Jr. The gardens are located on the Lake Washington Ship Canal and overlook the Hiram Chittenden Locks, which connect Puget Sound to Lake Washington. The locks and the canal offer their own beauty and are fascinating to watch. And every year, hundreds of thousands of salmon and trout climb the fish ladder in their annual migration. And Carl English was the supervisor of the gardens for 36 years, from 1940 until his death in 1976. After graduating with a degree in botany from Washington State University, Carl was hired by the Locks to tend the grounds. The 7 acres were intended to be used as a demonstration field where soldiers could march, but in reality, the area sat idle. Being a botanist, Carl thought the space had potential and would have loved to install a garden on the spot, but there was no budget. So Carl used his own time and went on many plant collecting trips around the world. And not surprisingly, Carl always brought back seeds and specimens for the garden. In addition, Carl and his wife, who was also a botanist, had a small seed business and published a seed catalog. Today, this lovely arboretum and specimen garden is home to nearly 1,500 flower varieties. And there's a charming description of the garden written by Dr. Arthur Kruckeberg in the summer of 1959. He wrote, "To be sure, the average visitor enters the grounds bent on viewing the activity of the boats and people at the locksides. Yet, once entering the North Gate, one senses the change from the clutter and crowding of city life to the serenity and expansive beauty of a park. To the knowing eye, the plantings are not at all typical of just any park. The keen gardener, horticulturalist, or botanist is at once convinced that he has stepped into a botanical sanctuary, a true arboretum." In Unearthed Words, here's Winter in the Garden by Edgar Albert Guest. Gray skies above us, and the snow blankets the frozen earth below. Where roses bloomed, the drifts lie deep. The hollyhocks are fast asleep. The cedars green are wearing white, like Richmond's wives on opera night. The elm tree strangely seems to throw a lean, gaunt shadow on the snow. The last brown leaves of twig and stem have found the storms too much for them. Winter, the tyrant of the land, once more is in supreme command. Edgar Guest was known as the people's poet during the first half of the 20th century. His poems were happy and hopeful, which is why people liked them. It's time to grow that garden library with today's book, A Year in Our Gardens, by Nancy Goodwin and Alan Lacey. This is a book of letters that were exchanged between Nancy Goodwin and Alan Lacey during 1 year between 1998 and 1999. They were both enormously passionate gardeners, and they drew inspiration from their shared zest for plants. Aside from sharing a growing zone, which was 7A, their gardens were very different. Alan gardened on sandy soil on a small lot, while Nancy battled rich clay loam on more than 60 acres. Together, Nancy and Alan swapped stories of their horticultural successes and failures, traded information about a great many plants, discussed their hopes, fears, and inspirations, and mused on the connections between gardening and music, family and friendship. And I love what it says in the description of the book. Any woman who buys a house because of the quality of the dirt is a true gardener. Any man who reads garden catalogs word for word, cover to cover, is equally enthusiastic about plants. Meet Goodwin and Lacey, two kindred spirits who also reveal the changes in their lives, sharing their innermost feelings and experiences as one does only with a very close friend. You can get a used copy of this book and support the show using the Amazon link in today's show notes for under $4. And today's recommended holiday gift for gardeners is the Eschert Design C3000 Herb Dryer. This is a hanging herb dryer. It's metal and it has a lot of different hooks, and you can hang it in your kitchen and enjoy aromatic herbs year-round. This herb dryer has a rustic patina and looks like it came straight out of a French farmhouse. It's almost 16 inches in diameter. You hang it from the ceiling, and it retails on Amazon for just $23.99. Fun gift. Finally, here's something sweet to revive the little botanic spark in your heart. Today is the birthday of the poet Carolyn Kaiser, who was born on this day in 1925. Kaiser wrote occasionally about the garden, and my favorite poem of hers is a charming piece about King Midas growing golden roses in a poem called The Ungrateful Garden. Here are some definitions to help you understand the poem. Ague is a shivering fever. Serried means standing in a row. To silt up is to block or fill with silt. And a shift is a nightgown. And to keep the show clean, I've eliminated all offensive language. Here's The Ungrateful Garden. Midas watched the golden crust that formed over his steaming sores, hugged his agues, loved his lust, but cursed the out-of-doors. Where blazing motes of sun impaled the serried roses metal bright. Those famous flowers, Midas wailed, have scorched my retina with light. This gift he'd thought would gild his joys, silt up the waters of his grief, His lawn's a wilderness of noise, the heavy clang of leaf on leaf. Within, the golden cup is good to lift, to sip the yellow mead. Outside in summer's rage, the rude gold thorn has made his fingers bleed. I strolled my halls in golden shift, as ruddy as a lion's meat. Then I rushed out to share my gift, and golden stubble cut my feet. Dazzled with wounds, he limped away to climb into his golden bed. Roses, roses can betray. Nature is evil, Midas said. Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener, and remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day. The Daily Gardener is produced weekdays in lovely Maple Grove, Minnesota. You can find complete show notes over at thedailygardener.org, and be sure to share the show with your garden friends. You can find The Daily Gardener on all your favorite social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Pinterest, and of course, Facebook. While you're over at Facebook, don't forget to join the Daily Gardener community. Just search for these 3 words, Daily Gardener Community. The group will pop right up and then request to join. Finally, I want to thank my team at Podfly Productions, where my fabulous editor is Eric Begay. Have a great day in the garden, and we'll see you tomorrow.